I've spent like 400 hours looking at the Tomodachi Life island. It's become somewhat iconic and special to me, so I decided to see how far I can go recreating it entirely from my memory. I mean, I've explored the game files and even modeled my own little Tomodachi Life island for a potential sequel, and so I'm pretty sure I'm super familiar with it. I am emotionally closer to this island than I am to my mom, who I swear is gonna come back with the flan from the store someday. And so I opened Blender and got to work, which is synonym with Cube Slaughter if you're unfamiliar with Blender. I wanted to start by recreating the actual landmass on which I was gonna place all the buildings. I mean, it's rather difficult to know where everything is meant to go without some form of guide, but I have to agree, in retrospect, this was a terrible way to go about it. I should have definitely created the flat surfaces in which the buildings were gonna go on and then connected them in a similar manner to what my mind remembered of the island, because this thing I did resulted in me having a really uneven island to work throughout. I was just fighting against it all the time, which made placing down some of the buildings, if not most of them, rather awkward. You can see from what I was doing that I was mostly trying to remember the buildings in the island and where they go. How exactly are they arranged? I immediately knew to create a cliff behind the apartment building, as I recalled perfectly well that there was a mountain on the upper tier behind where the building would be. Along with that, I remember the hat shop located to the apartment's left, as well as the ramp where all the houses would go, which is to the right. I then proceeded to lift and lower the ground around the area that would technically be the beach, or the space where the concert hall and lab testing machine would be, according to the fuzzy memory I was working with. I'll be honest, though I didn't hate what I made, I was very aware of its problems. The toolset I used wasn't the best, and the result is that I was unable to really bring what I had in mind to the 3D space. I knew this approach wasn't gonna cut it too well. So I kinda learned my lesson for the smaller island, where I actually created the different elevation levels with a little more care. And though I originally did put it pretty far away from the main island, I eventually did reposition it a little bit closer, just based on vibes. See, I recreated the angle that you would see from the game menus and just kinda put it there, and that's when I noticed, hey, something's not quite adding up. I also added a skybox, the pier, and some sea, because otherwise it's kinda hard for you all to see what exactly I'm doing, so say thanks. But proceeded next is me creating the cliffs behind the island, which are actually modeled in-game even if you rarely see them. I clearly recall this from that time I made that one animation of the real island for my Tomodachi Life 3 concept video. Finally, I used a combination of smoothing with sculpt tools and subdivision surfaces to get somewhat of a layout closer to what I wanted for the island, which was closer in my mind's image to what I achieved with the big one. I'm not gonna lie, I kinda felt like my entire layout was wrong, even in the little island, so I kinda gave up on getting it closer to what I thought it should be. As Gandhi or some cool guy said, just make it exist and we can make it good later. Totally not something I found on Twitter. But yeah, nothing spells out how defeated I felt by my inability to remember the layout than the fact that when I worked for like 20 minutes on the housing part, I made 6 steps, which I knew were impossible. I knew Tomodachi has a hard limit of 50 married couples in your island, which means 50 houses. Something in my mind said, hey, the in-game map has way more spaces than what your mind is picturing, so do that. Yeah, I just kind of ad-libbed it, which, hey, no houses blew up the last time I ad-libbed something, though there was a small fire, and in this case, well, the fire's kind of metaphysical, but it is there, as you'll see in the future. Metaphysical, is that the right word, or did I just make that up? What happened next was just a big round of tweaking the landmass to be more specific to how I remembered it, rounding the edges, adding the big ass steps which I remember complaining about in the past, straightening the Me Homes area, fixing up the small island to look less stupid, and elongating the space for the food mart and hat shops, since I managed to remember the pawn shop is actually there as I was placing the big steps. So let me talk about how I textured the island. You see, I was already sort of familiar with a lot of the textures from this game, but I felt like remaking them would take too long. My last paycheck was like 3 months ago and Auntie's gonna die if I get any more MOA citations. So I decided to just use the textures from the game, which I wouldn't start applying to any of the buildings I made unless I was absolutely sure that my building was in a good state. The moment I opened the buildings texture folder, the only changes I was allowed to make is fixing up the texture work, UV mapping, which does the modeling software where the textures go in the model, and tiny adjustments in case one element I fuzzily remembered didn't make any sense with how I saw it in the textures. This meant I kept changes to the models at a minimum, which actually resulted in some really stupid looking stuff, as you'll see when I get into the buildings. So blam, I put the cardboardy Tomodachi Life grass on top of my landmass and clapped proudly at myself, thinking I actually got somewhere close. I didn't. I did such a bad job. I actually ended up returning to fixing up the shape of the island whenever necessary throughout the project. There's some things I didn't change until the very last second during a 3M moment of inspiration, which I'll mention when we get there. But yeah, if you see some changes to the landmass in the footage as I explain how I do these buildings, just know it was a result of the memory of how the buildings looked, conflicting with my memory of how the landmass they were on looked. TLDR, it took me 3 hours to touch grass, and it's not even real grass. Before we continue, I want to say that if you like this video, you should totally watch my other stuff afterwards. I have been putting my heart and soul into videos for years and YouTube doesn't really promote them due to its weird algorithm. Not only would you do me a solid, but you'll also get to see some awesome, incredible videos. Some of the best in the platform, I am confident telling you this. Okay, pause over, enjoy the video. What's a better building to start building the buildings than the apartment building? I decided to use the biggest one for 2 reasons. Number 1 is that I knew the second tier had this spiral staircase to the left and I really didn't feel like recreating that. Number 2 is that I actually had ripped this model to upload on the model's resource. It did get rejected due to my ripping tools being bad at alpha textures, but at least the memory of ripping it did mean it was sort of fresh in my mind palace. After a bit of work and a break in the middle to swing wing it up, in the wing wing, it's so windy. Wait. I managed to have a reasonably accurate recreation. The little door in the rooftop, which is important to the Japanese version, the railing around the roof, the spotlights, and even these corner wall things around the entrance I didn't know how to model because I remembered some sort of piked fence, but not entirely how that would look. You may notice I also placed the windows in the building, once again going for 100 since I knew the game's limitations. I also decided right here that I would try to make any particularly specific textures myself for extra flair, such as the windows here, so that's why you'll see them be this blunt blue for a bit and then eventually they'll become the right texture, and yeah, I'll talk about those. The clothing shop came super easy to me since I just love smooth things that are black or white and thus easy to remember. I don't know why, and yes, this is a penis joke. I actually had more trouble getting the shape I wanted since I hadn't modeled anything big in Blender for quite some time. Last time I dropped this masterpiece of a video and it didn't do too good. So after I googled the key combo to bevel edges, I easily created the right shape I needed, and even textured it just to style on you. Finally, I stacked 2 copies of the building on top and put in a clothing shop image inside. Turns out what I remembered here wasn't actually from the game at all, but from the rips I used for that one animation I mentioned before, where I for some reason placed this texture in the interior. I didn't know this at the time, but while looking at the textures in the future, I immediately noticed there are floor and glass textures for the inside. My guess is I didn't even think about it because I was busy being amazed at my ability to remember the windows, which had this weird tilt to them. I just modeled that in with a big smile on my face. No comment on how accurate this is until that part of the video. Don't look it up, you cheater. If I can't do it, baby, so can't you. I'm the vanilla man. Now the hat and pawn shop. Those took a bit more. I was excited to make the hat shop since I was confident there, but forgetting the pawn shop earlier did not give me any confidence. I even had to further fix the landmass for its inclusion. One thing I kept in mind here was making sure the different elements I put were clearly visible from the angle of the camera that I kind of copied from the game's menus. I knew the island was designed so little of the buildings had any overlap. Creating the pawn shop itself wasn't anything special since I clearly didn't remember it, so I just kinda went with my gut and tried not to stress about it. Well, at least until the part where I cheated. Don't worry, I cheated because I remembered there was a bike outside of the shop in this little mountain of props, but remembering what the other elements are is kind of a lot harder. I remembered the bike because I made a reference to it in my Animal Crossing island of all things. So yeah, I just downloaded a bike model from somewhere else and just put it there to save time. It's a bit cheaty, but I don't think it's against the spirit of the challenge, so I don't mind it personally. I was gonna do a worse job at this anyways. Finally, I remembered the little chimney thing with the stained glass, as well as a weather paint. So I put both of those up and ran around naked for a short period of time to celebrate. The hat shop came without any problems to me. I knew the thing was an octagon and the width of the windows, so it just kind of appeared before my eyes in almost exact perfection. Next was the food shop. I need to eat something. I mostly remembered the shop had transparent windows that let you look inside, so I put a cube in the middle for the inside to be filled up. Besides that, everything I put down on it was pretty straightforward. At first I thought the building had this kind of extrusion around itself, but that seemed wrong, so I just kind of kept in the necessary geometry so that I would be allowed to just put the windows there if I decided that was what had to happen. The fountain was a similar scenario. It took a bit to get right, and I debated for a long time whether it was located to the left or to the right of the building, and at this point, the existence of the town hall had not even crossed my mind, so I was very confused on where the fountain would be. I was not so confused on its shape and the way the actual game does the water, with 2 layers of squiggly transparent water that create the fountain illusion and give the model depth without doing any funky animation work. I was pleased enough with this to texture it shortly after. Now the import shop? Oh, the import shop. I knew it was a weirdly shaped cube, but everything else about it was gone to some other place. I don't know where, hopefully somewhere nice. But the point is, my interactions with the building have been so limited, I had a genuine difficult time thinking about it. I ended up making this comical weird cube, and the sad part is, I'm pretty sure I almost got it right at the start before messing it up and thinking it was a tall thing. Because again, I did not remember the town hall, so I didn't think the tall shape would intrude on the space of any of the other buildings behind it. Just know I laughed every single time I opened up the project and saw this monstrosity front and center. I was so lost on how this building looked that I even almost made it the entirely wrong color until like that 3 AM inspiration session that is still a bit away. As you see, now I'm making the concert hall at the spot where the city hall should be. I was this lost about it, and I knew something didn't feel right. Anyways, I created this round dome after some fiddling with a separate piece of glass that can be moved freely for ease of editing if I remembered I missed anything important. While I recalled the inside of the concert hall was visible, including the stage within it, I couldn't figure out how the textures were gonna work, so I said fuck it and prepared for the worst in the future. I guess I also should tell you I placed a Mi Home land plot sometime off camera. I don't know why I didn't record it. As I was making this, I realized, holy crap, this is literally the interior shop but smaller. So I cloned the whole thing, stretched it up, cleaned up the ground, and all of a sudden my interior shop was 60% done. I knew there was furniture and other stuff inside it, so for now I put it on hold. What I was certain about was that I didn't know whether it was the interior shop or their concert hall that had the transparent sides. After a bit of fumbling around, I figured I'd let the thought stew for a bit more and come back to it before texturing. I added legs to the concert hall and noted how it looked kind of like a piano before I added another little golden clef on top, just kinda fumbling around with it. I didn't have an attack plan other than get it there, and the result looks pretty unprofessional, but that was my concert hall practically ready for fun. You can practically hear the most rancid lyrics coming out of it already. Next was the tower, another model I had ripped for fun. So once again, I got it pretty right. I knew the shape, the 4-layer cake, the surrounding fence, the sort of double tube at the bottom, and I even had the little cage formation thing. I knew that it also featured an elevator inside that is animated, but I didn't know how to implement it, so I ultimately just didn't. I kinda went to bed afterwards because it was 3 AM, but I didn't expect to wake up at 6 AM in a cold sweat. In part because I got a new kitty and he was walking around my head, but also in part because for some reason I remembered the fucking town hall at that moment. It was just me facepalming at 6 AM while trying to get the cat back to sleep. So once I actually woke up, that was the next order of business. I did a little structure in a similar shape to what I remembered, with its little flag and a clock, but I couldn't really think of any other details I missed because it was too early. Don't worry, I did come back to fix this a bit more. The ranking board was pretty easy besides the part where I messed around with a curve that sorta connected the light. You may think it looks goofy for me to have this weird triangle over the billboard's face, but this is gonna have a gradient texture that's gonna make it look like a lamp. That's the way the game does it. At this point, I decided it was time to bite the bullet and tackle the 2 remaining buildings that I had no confidence about. First was the love tester. I remembered it was this book-like structure as well as like 2 little mechanical components to move around, and these were set up in this sort of brown pedestal thing. It's a shape I got very vaguely in my head, so I just tried my best. For the 2 mechanical things, I went with a sun and a heart, knowing it may have been a cloud and a heart, but not quite sure. Halfway through, I did realize my memory of the sun was most likely wrong because it seemed too similar to a design I have very much in my mind, which is the final boss in Mythopia. It was more than evident considering this weird triangle thing is some wires got crossed and this is the result, I don't know. Then I did the heart before I also started second guessing if I even had picked the right shape, as I didn't remember the texture work on the heart, which was pretty big as a red flag. I then created this lamp for the pier, followed up by putting down 2 tents with little to no detail except for the shape. I simply couldn't remember much about them besides the fact that they were connected by some form of rope, which I ultimately decided not to put in because, I don't know, I knew it was wrong and I thought it was funnier if I just kept these 2 shitty tent-shaped cubes. I went on to finish the interior shop by creating these stairs inside of it, as well as any furniture that I could remember. It's actually kinda hard to see what the furniture is from Tomodachi Life in-game because it's so small, which added to how I also forgot I wanted the sides of this to be made out of glass. I ended up making this monstrosity. It's supposed to be a couch. So next I made a couch, as well as a bunch of other furniture items that could go there. I clearly remembered a lamp and a plant, but everything else is just me guessing. By this point, I was super in the groove of things. I made the camera shop, which is frankly straightforward and has a massive camera decoration for the player's convenience, you know, it's hard to miss it. I knew the Ferris wheel had a bunch of 2D textures as well as a railing, so I actually just put down 3 little sandwich circles there, all tasty and edible and filled with cheese and lettuce and little octagon cards. The park was practically free since it's just a wooden bench with a tree behind it and a bush to the side. I will actually be putting in bushes into the island in a bit, but I wanted to show you how I recall the game made its trees and bushes. It's basically 2 triangles that lead up to an amalgam of 2D planes with the same texture. I did them a little bit too organized, but I kinda got the idea right, yeah. I'm telling you now, yeah, I messed this up. The news and cafe buildings were a lot more fuzzy, so I couldn't make those as pretty as I wanted them. The frame to transparent support transition in the news tower was more than a given, as well as the big screen it's got on top with the news on display, but I gotta admit I didn't know how the support started or ended, neither did I know how this building was made interesting at all. I ended up adding 2 random floating rings to it for some reason. I genuinely don't know why I kept this, they're not even funny, but there they are. I ended up removing one of them. Red Fruit was a similar story. I knew it was a simple shed with a mansard style roof, then a lining of these brick flower pots filled with these round bushes, but as you can see, I put it in the wrong side, and then I put the door on the wrong side, and then I started thinking about the cinematic where a me sets up 2 me's up and begins wondering how exactly the windows were arranged. Needless to say, the result is a mess that I was sure to feel stupid about when I compared it to the final model, particularly because I didn't know what direction this building pointed at. Now that I had all the buildings done, it was time to go back and just add any other details that I felt were important, like the small planes inside buildings with PNGs that would spoof some depth. I placed them in the hat, clothing, import and photoshops. I also added some steps in front of the concert hall because I was more than sure it did have some sort of stair in the front, and on a similar note, I added railings and paths to the entire island where I recalled seeing some. The paths were ugly, so I removed them, but I did keep the dirt around buildings as a little tribute to my memory of how the underside of buildings looked. Finally, it became time to texture the models. I remind you that once I opened the textures folder, I was only allowed to make minor tweaks to the 3D models, so I was frankly kinda nervous about making sure all the details were right. This also meant it was time to recreate a few iconic textures, as you can see me doing right now. I created the apartment windows being on or off for the sake of variety, a mock-up version of the image in the newscast screen, which I made with a lot more resolution than necessary, and finally, the sign in front of the food shop with the mama duck and the 2 little duckies. I've full on made this texture before, so the real little ducks obviously looked nothing like this. Doesn't mean I'm still not pleased with how cute and chubby my simple doodles ended up. Oh yeah, I also made the texture of the carts in the Ferris wheel, just because I thought it would be cool. Texturing the model came with good things and bad things, and things of eldritch nature that will not be addressed further. Even looking at the textures, it's hard to know which ones went where. I started texturing the rankings board, which I clearly remembered being blue, and it was green? Yet there's also this blue texture that I was 100% sure is used in the forefront, so what is happening here? I could not figure it out. This kind of stuff broke my little rabbit mind into 12 pieces. Not a dog, by the way. So many people think I'm a dog, and that is even more mind-boggling. Compare that to what happened when I put the textures in the camping site. I immediately noticed details I should have remembered, like these little walls over the doors, and I don't even understand how the texture is meant to work around my arbitrary recreation. Needless to say, I knew these were a disaster right then and there. And a similar experience started happening when I textured the rest of the stuff. The hat shop has 3 textures for display items, but I put the 4 display items in, so I had to trick my way around getting a 4th texture. The railing on the apartment building wouldn't work how I made them, so fixing was required. I made the import shop yellow, but those were not its colors in the textures, but the game does occasionally color stuff through a shader, so I just kind of went with my gut feeling. Not to mention, I put display things inside when the game has no display items in the actual shop, so there were no textures for this. I didn't put any posters in the food shop and couldn't add them because I remember them due to seeing the textures, which, if you remember, is against the rules. There was an additional layer to the Ferris wheel that got no assigned textures, so I just had to make one up. The camera I put in the photo studio had a square shutter button, but the texture seemed round, except I think what I thought were the shutter button was actually the lens, so I heard myself in my confusion and entered the avatar state or something, because I genuinely did not know what was happening. Yes, there's also this bit where I searched for Fuzz Jam by The Lazy Eyes before my subconscious remembered another whole different album with the same name. This should really tell you how bad my memory actually is. On a related note, you should totally check out Fuzz Jam and Hippo by The Lazy Eyes. Good ass music. Point is, I got some railings backwards, I got some textures backwards. Where the absolute fuck is my pawn shop? What if the import shop was actually black all along? Did I forget anything? Should I add some form of arbitrary path that will be wrong but keep the variety? Is the ranking board to the left or to the right of the concert hall? Is this wrong? Does this go here? This here? Ah! And then I got hit with a genuine moment of 3 AM inspiration. A thing that poked me a lot since I textured the island a while ago is that I couldn't recall at all how the game transitioned from the island into the beach. That's why we get these weird jagged edges to the side of the island in all the clips. I knew there was no transition texture since the start, but my brain couldn't make it add up. And so I sort of put it in the back of my mind until this moment. 3:25 AM, I figured out how the game did it. Cliffs. So here's a little Nintendo 3D texturing tip that is actually quite useful. Nintendo has a long history of working with underpowered hardware, so a lot of their games use texture techniques that are easy to forget about. Wanna transition some grass into a cliff? Simply taper out and back a little piece of geometry and voila! You've saved yourself the texture but kept the transition. But what if we didn't want the transition? Then the opposite principle applies. A 90-degree angle is a perfect transition for having no transition. And so, armed with that knowledge, I set out to fix my grassy woes. Fixing up that kinda gave me a second win on patching up details I didn't think about, specifically how the beach doesn't even exist to the right side of the pier. In my mind, that's all a cliff that dips directly into the sea, with the lab test and camp structures being on a lower level. I also took this chance to redo the me homes to their proper 5x5 proportions, as well as reducing the empty space I had left surrounding it. With a refreshed mindset, I realized a few of the buildings had inconsistencies between my memories and what I actually put on the model. I remember that getting to the beach wasn't impossible and created a ramp. I decided to improve my news station to have more layers and be less stupid, and I went back and filled with some colors, as well as heavily retouching the town hall to look as I expected it to. The reason I was so messed up on the hedge and door in the cafe is actually because it's facing the whole other way, giving the photo studio the silent treatment for being such a bitch. In about 30 minutes, I genuinely felt like my recreation became a lot more accurate. And lo and behold, the results. Yep, I think I did a pretty good job, but that's before I start comparing it to the real model. Time for my heart to break. Let's see. Oh wow, that's not too bad. I'd score myself an 8 out of 10. Let's go over the deets. First off, the island shape I made is wrong in the weirdest way. While from the front most objects do look to be in the same relative location, once you look upwards you realize the in-game perspective is actually rather deceptive. My shape is a horizontal oval, while the game's is actually kind of vertical. It was created in a very interesting perspective that sorta aims towards the camera, which is not something you can realize unless you are looking at it from different angles. Overall, I made 4 major mistakes in the island layout. 1. As you may have screamed at your monitor earlier, I only added 5x5 me home spaces, which adds up to 25 instead of the 5x10 that there should be to get 50. This was me being bad at math. I literally got my title in programming earlier this year. I will accept the congratulations and subsequent name calling for the mess up. 2. The pawn shop, which is a disaster of its own degree, is in the wrong floor and placed to the right of the hat shop. Turns out my initial hunch way earlier was on point, that the results of the logic I somehow ended up following. The import concept ranking buildings are all spread out incorrectly. From the game's perspective, you don't really notice the town hall is closer than it seems, which leads to me making a dirtier arrangement for the buildings. There's an empty space here. Even if the order is effectively the same, the elevation of the entire conglomerate is way more interestingly composed in the game. And 4, turns out there is a beach to the right of the pier in For Real Land. Alright, not its right. The beaches themselves are closer to circles than anything, which really threw my memory for a loop. I can't help but wonder if I could have done everything better simply by remembering this information. I wish my L's ended there, but I acquired a lot more. Let's look at my biggest W's and L's for each building. I thought the worst building was going to be the import shop, but it's actually only the 3rd worst. A lot of what I made was entirely improvised, sure, and I even had to go into the internet and scout for some missing textures. But the real building is just a weird cube, and it does have an interior with a glass window. The interior also has these gold thingies hanging inside, evidently not the spiral chandeliers I decided to use, but something. It also turns out my color confusion was entirely warranted. The actual building has this gradient from yellow to black that I had to recreate in the past, hence my confusion. And even then, then if you see it in game, you can notice even my recreation of it is pretty flawed. The building also has a door to a world of pure imagination. Second worst is the pawn shop. Though I ultimately got the bake shape right, including the little chimney-like thing on the right side, everything else is very wrong, except the bike. Apparently the bike is the only thing I actually did get 100% right. The texture that I thought was a door is actually lining the entire side of the building. There is no sign in the game, there's also no other bane, and the items outside the shop are completely different. I remember this box, but mostly because I just put in a box-like item at some point. I hate my recreation, it looks so fucking stupid and dumb next to the real one. But the worst one is definitely the glove tester. What the fuck was I on? Sure, I remember the paper-like aesthetic, and there's actually was a sun and a heart, but everything else is just an amalgam of whatever the fuck. I can't forgive myself for forgetting the handle, but the overall thing is so much of a mistake that I genuinely feel embarrassed showing you this. There were also some buildings I got super close to. The hat and Photoshop are 90% accurate. I mistakenly mirrored both of them in my mind, and the awning in both structures is either not actually there or wrong. But I'm really proud with how these turned out. Kinda wish I remember the round door on the hat shop, cause otherwise it's a really close recreation. While my fountain is a little low poly version of the real one, the trees and bushes I placed around it are spot on with the actual islands. I actually popped up when I saw these, cause these are the exact same. Meanwhile, every building on the top floor is a bit off from the real counterparts. The clothing shop has actually a tilt to the entire structure, not just the windows themselves like I did. The furniture shop only has 2 floors, and the furniture inside it is bigger and better organized, and the tower is plumpier. And yet, no L compares to the massive blunder I committed in the apartment windows. I think I genuinely didn't think this at all, because I know for sure there's only 8 windows. I've seen thousands of hours of this game. There's definitely only 8 windows per row, and yet when I actually put the things, I realized, hey, that only gives me 96. I'm missing 4 windows. That's right, idiot! There's only 4 apartments on floor 13! Here, for your enjoyment, a side-by-side comparison of every building set to a MIDI cover of Fiesta by Ween. Well, now I'm even more familiar with this island. That means I'm just gonna miss it more by the time Tomodachi Dreams comes out. On that note, you may notice that I just called Tomodachi Life Living the Dream Tomodachi Dreams. That's because I'm kinda divided on whether to shorten it to that or to Tomodachi Living. Both can be confused for other things, but I will be using it because the full title is kind of a mouthful. My question is, which do you guys prefer? I wanna use a term that's more aligned with what the community wants. So just shoot a comment telling me what you think and I'll tally them up myself. Now let's see if I can remember how to tell you gently about this job application form I just found.